Okay, so let's just get into a bit of remembrance of our dear, iconic Father Boniface Hardin. Okay, so this is just straight from Wiki. Um, Boniface Hardin, OSB, that stands for the Order of Saint Benedict. He was born James Dwight Randolph, or Randy as they called him when he was a child, Hardin, in November of 1933. Okay. Um, he's known for being, of course, a Benedictine monk, a social activist, and the founding president of Martin University here in Indiana. Okay. So, like I said, he was born in 1933 in Louisville, Kentucky. Both of his parents were graduates of what was then called um, the Kentucky State Industrial College for Colored Persons, which eventually became Kentucky State University. Um, and so, his parents were well educated. Um, his mother was a teacher her whole career, and his father did various things, essentially whatever brought in the most money at the time. Very, good people. Um, so apparently, which I did not know this until I started looking back, um, Father Hardin's middle name, Randolph, okay, they called him Randy when he was a kid, actually honored A. Philip Randolph, who was the founder of the Pullman Porters Union. So when when your parents give you a middle name like that, they're not playing any games. They expect you to do something and be somebody. Okay. So yeah, apparently A. Philip Randolph, the founder of the Pullman Porters Union. If you guys don't know anything about that, just go find out on your own. We're here on one subject right now, but very important, need to know, must know information. Okay. Um, so A. Philip Randolph was a frequent visitor to the home of Albert Hansbrough, which was Hardin's mom's father, and he was also a train porter. So he spent Randy spent most of his youth in Bardstown, Kentucky, and by the time he was a young child, he was already a devout Catholic. And early on, he memorized all of the words to the Latin Mass. And everyone, of course, knew him as like the star altar boy. So he was rocking that halo from like a real early age. Okay. So that's just, who he was. Well, along comes World War II, and that causes some shifting happening in a lot of families, and they ended up moving from Kentucky to Indiana. So they ended up in Smoketown, a section of Louisville, or they ended up in Jeffersonville. I'm sorry, they ended up in Jeffersonville. But yeah, so they moved around a little bit during that time. So about age 13 is when he proclaimed a vocation to the priesthood. His mentors had, basically, um, you know, decided that they wanted to, promote him. Like they wanted to help him become who he was destined to become. But then, of course, here comes someone and they're like, no, he's too brown for that. So never mind. Like, no, just no. Like, so just mind boggling. They do call him out. I don't know anything about this person, but I couldn't really find a lot about Archbishop John A. flourish who rejected Father Hardin's admission to the Louisville Seminary on the basis of his race. We don't know much about him, but there's a whole lot to be said and to be found on Dr. Reverend Father Boniface. Okay, just saying. So yeah, so he was like, nah, you can't come up and through here. Hardin's family learned that another seminary in Indiana had just begun taking black students into their school program, and so the family decided we gotta go, and there's nothing here. They had to, of course, like raise the money. They had to like crowdsource the money because the archbishop refused outright to support him financially. So there was that. I don't know how you're never mind. We won't go there. So yes, during this time he decided to become a monk rather than a priest of the diocese, and he was given the name Boniface during this time. So this is when his name changed from Randy to Boniface, to Father Boniface. He was ordained in 1959 on what he called the most important day of my life. That's what he called it. Father Hardin's first assignment as a priest was as assistant treasurer at St. Meinrad. He completed his studies in business at the University of Notre Dame and prepared him for his role. And after 6 years, he became increasingly restless, feeling isolated and unable to use his talents and knowledge. He was feeling stifled. And so in 1965, he responded to the invitation of Father Albert Jamie of Holy Angels Church in Indianapolis to serve as his associate pastor. So he's moving north in 1965, okay? And so, yeah, this is when things really, really start to take off. By the mid 1960s, Holy Angels Parish was one of 3 Black majority Catholic churches in Indianapolis. Okay, so here he comes, and from the onset of his time there, Father Hardin was attuned, very well attuned to the racism in the Catholic Church as well as the broader society. So he quickly became involved in protests, opposing police brutality, segregation, poverty, y'all know, and the construction of a highway, Interstate 65, that threatened and eventually did cut off the neighborhood surrounding Holy Angels Institute. So he became increasingly radical, calling public officials to task, okay, talking about some and exchanging his Roman collar with close cropped hair. And he took that off and put on the dashiki and grew his hair out into an afro to let y'all know he was serious. Okay. So that's when it really began. So the Martin Center years come now with the help of a sympathetic priest, Father Bernard Strange of St. Rita's Parish in Indianapolis, as well as Holy Angels parishioners and other supporters. Father Hardin bought a property on College Avenue in Indianapolis and founded the Martin Center. Okay, he named the Martin Center for Martin Luther King Jr. and Saint Martin de Porres. The center was described in 1970s in the 1970s as a biracial and ecumenic, y'all, what is this word? biracial, essentially an effort to overcome the polarization brought about by ignorance, injustice, and hostility between blacks and whites in the metropolitan area of Indiana. Okay, he was trying to be a peacemaker. So this piece of land that he purchased on College Avenue, he purchased with the intent and the heart, the mind, for it to be a place of peace first and foremost. So he was then soon joined by Sister Jane Schilling, a sister of St. Joseph, of Carondelet, who had been principal at Holy Angel School. So their partnership is where things really took off for the both of them. And so in 1971, Father Hardin and Dr. Raymond Pierce received a grant, okay, to establish the Sickle Cell Center. So this is a specific portion of the Martin Center that is now to test for the disease and to educate families. This is the birth of the Sickle Cell Center, of the Martin Center Sickle Cell Initiative as we know it today. And so, yes, that was in 1971, and I was not even thought of yet. Thank you, Father Boniface. Thank you, Sister Jane. And y'all, after that, it was really on and popping. You know, after that, it really was on and popping. He did end up doing so much when it came to sickle cell in the community, Black public relations. He was a culture icon. I can remember even as a child seeing him, like going to the Martin Center or seeing him at Martin University or just out and about and thinking like, here's this giant man. He was, I was a child. So here's this big man with these big shoes and this big white afro, and he has the most angelic face I've ever seen. It was like how a child might look at Jesus. And I just was so enamored with the fact that I could see that he actually had a heart for me. Like he had a heart for all of us. And so reading about his life, his struggles, he did have an older sibling that passed away in infancy. Reading about his parents, and their connection to the Pullman Porter Union, like, mind blown. And so I just wanted to take a minute just to speak his name, to say thank you, to really put into perspective for so many people that one person can make a difference generationally. We can all have a legacy. You can have your own legacy. I certainly plan to have my own legacy. Okay? And that's the way it should be. That is the way it should be. But it takes hard work. It takes guts to decide that you are someone, to know who you are, what you will be doing with your life at 13 years old, and it actually come true. That's real faith and determination. That is not fakery. Pure, genuine heart. They call this man the Frederick Douglass of like Indy, essentially. Like that's what they call him. I mean, for obvious reasons, just a giant to look up to. Of course, handsome as ever, wonderful hair, a presence like no other, a heart for the people, every person. no matter how tan they are. Well, you know, there was a lot of things that he still planned to do after, of course, founding Martin University and, and trying, essentially for the rest of his life to keep it afloat and keep it successful. That journey was a bit difficult, as some of you may know. You may have lived through it, along with me. But yes, he had planned to write several books, but you know, we have plans. That's what happens. Of course, he's won numerous awards and recognitions. The list just goes on when you look at it, and sadly, he had a stroke in 2011, and he died on March 24th in 2012. And he's buried at St. Meinrad Arch Abbey in southern Indiana, most likely where he belongs and is happy at rest in peace in his arms after having done such a well done job.